Hello and welcome to the presentation on the demographic transition. In this presentation, we're learning about some of the silver linings of human behavioral abilities that will allow us to face some of the challenges that humanity has really created for itself by being one of the most successful species of primate on the planet. So we discussed previously the population boom, and this is the exponential rate of population increase in just the last 1,000 years, and now we're exceeding 7 million people on this earth. And I know some students always think, well, yes, population is exceeding rapidly, but I know from my own experience that family size has been decreasing. So if you look at your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents' generation, they're having fewer and fewer kids each generation overall. So if population size is exponentially increasing and family size is decreasing, what is going on? And there's a particular model we use to explain this trend of decreasing family size, and it's called the demographic transition. The demographic transition is a model to represent a demographic change. Demography is the study of patterns of populations. Change from high birth rates and high death rates to low birth rates and low death rates. And I'm going to show you what I mean in a picture soon. So what the demographic transition results in is decreased birth rates and essentially smaller family sizes. So here's how it works in a population, and I'll show you this picture step by step, and then we'll look at some real examples. 3 things you need to pay attention to, or 5 actually, including the axes. You've got time, so as we move from left to right, we're going forward in time. And the y-axis, the number of births per 1,000. So higher is higher births, higher deaths, lower is lower births, and lower deaths per 1,000 people. And this means we can look at 3 things. We can look at the death rate, we can look at the birth rate, and we can look at the total population. So we can see that as death rates decrease, there's a gap in time before birth rates decrease and population increases. So even with a decreasing birth rate, we still get an increasing population. But if you see there at stage 5, there is the hope that the population will level off over time. So let's look at this stage by stage. So first stage, you can think of this as like the American West. High birth rates, high death rates, roughly in balance. A lot of people born, a lot of people dying. So population remains pretty low, and this is most of human history, which is why population on that growth boom graph is so low for so long. Then you can imagine we're in the American West. Death rates decrease. So birth rates are still high, that's the purple line. Death rates have dropped and the population is increasing. This is like the invention of penicillin. Fewer people are dying, but there's still a lot of people being born, so that means that the population is increasing. In stage 3, death rates are continuing to go down, but now birth rates have started to go down as well, and you can see that difference between stage 2 and stage 3. Now the purple line is dropping. The population is still increasing because birth rates are higher than death rates. Stage 4, things have leveled off. Death rates have dropped to a low, but birth rates have also dropped to a low, so population levels off. And then of course it's anyone's guess what's going to happen next. So really we are in a stage 4. In most countries of the world right now, death rates have dropped in most countries. Birth rates are just starting to drop or have already dropped. So this stage 5 is really an adequate picture of the future for humanity, although we don't quite know what's going to happen. So here's a real live graph of the demographic transition. This data comes from Sweden. You can see time on the bottom there. This is year. So this started in 1735. The Swedish take really good population statistics. In this graph, you can see the legend at the bottom. CBR, that's the birth rate, is in blue. And CDR, that's the death rate, that's in red. And here are the stages labeled at the top of the graph. So we can see here in stage 2, the red line has started to drop. So here we see a decrease in death rates. Stage 3, now the blue line starts to go down, so we see a decrease in birth rates. And finally, we see a leveling off down at the bottom here. And the U.S. has gone through this transition as well. This is just a really nice graph that illustrates the pattern that we're seeing. Now, why am I bothering telling you about this? Well, that's great, good news, wonderful. But why is this interesting? And if we think about this from an evolutionary perspective, if we think about people as the products of natural selection, we've talked all through the course about the fact that we expect them to maximize their inclusive fitness. We're here because our ancestors were successful. If we've inherited their traits, we expect to inherit those successful behaviors that lead to us leaving more offspring and genetic heritage to future populations. When you decrease your birth rates, when you show a decline in fertility, this directly lowers your lifetime reproductive success. So from an evolutionary perspective, this is a mystery. Why are people reproducing less than they could? And this is quite drastic. If you look at, here's the decrease in fertility or decrease in birth rates over time from 1860 to 1980. This is just Europe, but in some of these countries, birth rates have halved in less than 30 years. And we're seeing this increasingly around the world, and we're seeing it with increasing rapidity around the world. In just one generation, people having half the kids that their parents did. Another concern outside of evolutionary theory is this is why people are concerned about Social Security. Social Security is a pyramid scheme. You assume there's more workers than retirees. So here are those age structure population graphs that we looked at when we had our guest lecture on population growth. And if you remember, age goes from bottom to top. So the bottom is roughly the proportion of young people, and the top of these blue and purple pyramids at the bottom, over the top, those are the old people. So the Social Security system is really built on a stage 2 and expanding population scheme. And this is what was happening in the U.S. when Social Security was created. You've got more people working and paying into Social Security, and you've got fewer old people taking advantage of that. Now, if we imagine ourselves now in stage 4, what's happening is that we've got a lot of people being born, a lot of people living to old age, and now people are decreasing their birth rates. We have fewer workers and more old people. So that aside, let's go back to our evolutionary question. Why do people reduce offspring? Especially with the increase in resources. So it's not just about decreasing fertility, it's about decreasing fertility in the face of increasing resources. And we see the first people who do decrease their fertility are the richest. So here's a chart from 1915, surviving children per married couple. This comes from England and Wales. And if you look at the social class of the person, the professional workers and the lower white collar workers are having about 3 kids per marriage. Agricultural laborers, coal miners, are having 4.5 to 5 kids per marriage. So the people with the most resources are having the fewest children, and we just don't expect to see this from everything we know of natural selection. So how can we explain these low birth rates, and how can we explain this entrance into and continuance of the demographic transition? One explanation is that we talked about a quality-quantity trade-off. Perhaps people are maximizing the quality of their offspring and forgoing quantity. This is especially important, remember, as we talked about with mammals, as mortality decreases and offspring have to be more competitive. I will go through each of these points. We also talked about non-genetic mechanisms of inheritance like culture. Culture can teach us many things, some of them not always adaptive. And to give a nod to evolutionary psychology, perhaps this is a maladaptive byproduct, a maladaptive response of humans to something in the environment. So we're programmed to respond in a certain way, decrease fertility when something happens. Perhaps in our novel, non-Pleistocene environments, we're misreacting to some environmental cue. So let's look at the evidence for each of these. Are people maximizing quality? Well, a lot of these countries started going through the demographic transition in the 1700s and 1800s, so the 19th century. And this is a time in Europe of industrialization. And it's a world where high level parental investment are critical to an offspring success and are costly to the parent. So we see novel patterns of child rearing. So in the 1800s, the 19th century, we're starting to see a devaluation of child labor. Children are no longer foraging for themselves, helping out on the farm. There's labor laws, they can't work in the factories anymore. So kids really can provide less for themselves than ever before. So kids are costly because they can't even provide for anything for themselves. There's also growing benefits of education in this open market economy. You get an education, you go to school, you can become a merchant, you become a banker, you can become a financier. If you fund your child's education, also costly, they will have a higher chance of success later in life. At the same time, agricultural land is extremely limited, and so parents really want a limited number of inheritors, so they break up the farm the less. So kids are very costly to the parent, and this costly investment is critical for their own success. So perhaps it's a quality versus quantity. Now, some researchers in the United States looked at this in New Mexico, and this data comes from the year 1995, so about 20 years ago, and the researchers found that reducing the number of kids that you had did not increase the number of grandkids. So the quantity-quality trade-off says have fewer kids because you will be repaid, those kids will be more successful than lower quality but higher quantity children. In New Mexico, this doesn't seem to be the case, at least among the average population, the average person. We'll come back to this after we talk about the other explanations. So no evidence for quantity-quality so far. Let's look at non-genetic mechanisms of inheritance. So remember, we talked about culture. Culture is a system of inheritance. You're learning things from people who learned things. And we have these very quick and dirty rules of thumb that help people achieve massive amounts of social learning. You have some psychological mechanisms that you can deploy to help you pick out important information from all that's circulating around you. And so culture is very often adaptive because we can acquire so much information in such a short time, but it's not always because it is quick and dirty and you have to take other people's word for it. So if you were to copy the successful strategy and your standard of success was based on something like the Nobel Prize, well, people who spend all their time pursuing the Nobel Prize very often have fewer children, and this idea can get copied by other individuals. Hey, that Nobel Prize winner is successful. One of the characteristics that makes her successful is that she has fewer offspring. Perhaps we should copy that, and we could be successful too. So culture can teach us often maladaptive behaviors. Another confounding factor of modern cultural transmission is that in pre-industrialized societies, there is a greater amount of social learning from kin. People spent a lot more time around kin. Kin encourage reproductive behavior to maximize their inclusive fitness. And if you've ever had a parent say to you, when are you getting married? When are you giving me grandkids? Or maybe you nag your own children, when am I getting grandkids? You know what I'm talking about. So what's happened in industrialized societies is that individuals are removed from kin. We don't spend as much time around kin, so maybe these pressures, these cues that we would have gotten from them have been removed also. Okay, so that's culture. What about our evolved psychology? Well, the maladaptive byproduct hypothesis says that humans have evolved psychological mechanisms to deal with commonly faced problems in our evolutionary past. We discussed this in our previous lecture. One of these might direct fertility choices. So we might be experiencing something in the environment that signals to us, to our evolved psychologies, decreased fertility. But we don't really have any hypotheses for what that might be, but it's possible that our evolved psychologies are misfiring in modern environments in some ways. Most likely, what is at stake here is a combination of factors. Wealthy individuals can benefit from reduced fertility. Think of the kings of England in days past. You only wanted an heir and a spare because you didn't want to divide the kingdom. So there is a quantity-quality trade-off for individuals who have to raise very competitive offspring. And other people who maybe don't have these same pressures then imitate these strategies in their quest for success. In the meantime, society is changing, child-rearing patterns are changing, you're getting other cultural cues from non-kin as well. So we can see this reduced birth rates trickle down through economic classes, and we also see it trickling down through developing countries. So it's most likely a combination of this quantity-quality trade-off in some individuals, and then a cultural inheritance of the strategy by others. So some solutions to the demographic transition, if you wanted to, quote unquote, fix this problem, how would you do that? Well, you would remove people from cultural norms that signal small family sizes. So you would instead put them in an environment where social norms promote reproduction, and also it helps if social norms minimize wealth-seeking behavior. So you can direct all of your resources towards offspring and number of offspring. And this is the Amish strategy. They're really good at culturally isolating themselves. They have lots of social norms to promote reproduction, and they do minimize this wealth-seeking behavior so they can maintain high birth rates generation after generation. Another potential solution, and many European countries have done this, is to decrease the costs of child rearing. So you don't have to put so much of your own effort into raising quality children. The state will help you. And this, in France and Germany, you get money when you have a child, and there's lots of opportunities to balance career and family. So not only will they give you something like €3,000 every time you have a baby, they'll also give a year of paid maternity leave. So this is one way of decreasing the cost on the mother and decreasing costs on the family and making it easier to have multiple high-quality offspring. That's it for the lecture on demographic transition. I'll see you next time when we talk about the tragedy of the commons. Thanks for listening.